As part of their enduring commitment to justice, equity, and expression, the Open Society Foundations are proud to sponsor Many Lumens. You're listening to Many Lumens, where we talk about and find meaning in the intersections of art, social change, and popular culture. I'm your host, Maori Karmael Holmes. For this episode, I'm joined by powerhouse producer Deniese Davis. She began her career producing indie music videos, web series, and short films, including Issa The Misadventures of Awkward Black Girl. From there, she went on to become Insecure's co-executive producer and a producer of a Black Lady sketch show. Deniese is also a mission-driven entrepreneur. She's recently founded 2 media companies that seek to uplift and champion Black and Brown voices. Our conversation is a masterclass on what it means to work as a producer. Deniese shares her journey from rising Las Vegas basketball star to helping to shepherd the cultural phenomenon that became Insecure. We talk about her ambitions with her new venture, Reform Media Group, finding work-life balance, and we connect over a shared passion for musicals. Here's my conversation with Deniese. So I want to start a little bit with your origins. I read that you were born and raised in Las Vegas, and so I was curious how long your family has been in Nevada.
It's one of my favorite questions because it's always my fun fact, because I found as I've lived out in the world, a lot of people, their first response is, I've never met someone from Vegas. and it makes me realize how few people get out of that town. So, I'm born and raised. My mother is born and raised. And my grandmother, my mom's mom, is actually from a small mining town called Tonopah, Nevada, about an hour outside of Vegas. So I'm very much a generational Vegas baby, which is even more rare in itself because it's a very famous commuter city that I think a lot of people don't normally grow up there. And then honestly, the people who do never leave. So it's usually why people never meet someone from there. So yeah, so it's in my blood and I rep it pretty hard. I never lived anywhere else as a child. And that's to this day where the majority of my family still resides.
I was curious because I have a lot of family that lives in Henderson and Vegas, but they moved from Los Angeles in the last 20, 25 years. So I don't know anybody. I think you might be the first person I've met who's like from the area.
It always happens that way, which is so funny. But it's also obviously a city that a lot of people have been to, right?
Yeah.
So it's just so ironic that people realize like, oh, I don't think I've ever met someone from there. Everyone knows the city. Everyone's heard of it, obviously. But it's interesting to see the reaction when people realize they've never met someone who actually grew up there, which, yeah, I didn't realize how rare it was until I left and was like, wait, what do you mean? Everyone I know is from Vegas.
That's so interesting. So also in, doing research about you, I read that you were a serious basketball player in high school before you decided to kind of switch direction and pursue film producing. And I was curious if your family had anything to do with either of these interests. Do you come from an athletic family, or is your family working in the entertainment industry, on the Strip perhaps, or,
Yeah, so none of the above. I mean, my mom definitely worked for, primarily 25, 30 years plus on the Strip in different casinos in different capacities. It is our one major workforce in Vegas. But with sports, sports for me I was playing organized basketball, I think as early as 7, 8 years old in these summer camps they used to do. So that was really what I grew up doing and loved to do it. And what ended up happening is, I chose to go to this public high school called Centennial in Vegas that at the time had brought down the women's state championship for basketball to Southern Nevada. There's only Northern Nevada, which is really Reno, and Southern Nevada, which is really Vegas. But for the first time in like 20 years, this high school, the women's basketball team won back-to-back state championships. And so it was a huge deal just in terms of the competitive nature. And they were like A1 ranked nationally. And so I chose to go to this high school for that reason and started JV freshman, sophomore year, was getting primed for varsity. But, I think when you're coming of age, especially as a teenager, I kind of had a moment where, I was working, getting a job, helping my mom out. I come from a single mother household. So I was having a normal teenage life. But the more I saw the varsity team and how much time and energy and effort they were putting into the sport, which I loved, right? I just knew I was going to go to college and play ball and all of these things. There was a gnawing part of me that just wanted to be a kid and just wanted to enjoy being a teenager. And in some ways, I couldn't really have both because of, I think, the level of competitiveness that I would have had to step into. And there was a moment where I realized, oh, this is also going to continue on to college and whatever I decide to do next. And I love basketball for the sport of playing it, for the collaboration, for the team environment, all of the things, but I didn't really love it as a job. And so I kind of had a moment where I said, you know what, maybe I should get out before it's too late, because I also didn't want to continue to commit and lose my passion for that because of knowing what I think what would be asked of me. So after my sophomore year, I didn't go back out for the team and kind of surprised everyone, family included, but the family was very supportive. But I think the team itself was very surprised because they're like, what do you mean you're not coming back out for tryouts? I just stopped playing. But, putting that aside opened me up with all this spare time. And funnily enough, I took a class that was a video production class in high school, was one of the first classes they were doing, and started doing like the video announcements. And so I was an observer one year, thought what they were doing was really cool, became really close with the teacher who kind of started teaching me things, how to edit, let me take a camera home to play around with and shoot some stuff. And, I kind of bit a bug, and I knew nobody from the entertainment industry. Didn't realize that was a career path at all. There's not really an industry of sorts in Vegas, to be honest. But once I discovered that there was a path there, honestly, I remember being shocked to find out I can go to college and get a degree in this thing. I was like, what? That doesn't even seem real. What do you do with a degree in film? I just was like, I guess, I'm really curious. I really enjoyed playing around and decided that that's what I was going to do. And in a lot of ways, one replaced the other for me, right? I think I found my passion in the thing that I felt like, oh, this could be an access point. This could be a career that I could enjoy and not feel like work.
Wow, that's a lot of maturity at 15, 16.
At 16, I know. Who was I?
When's your birthday? We have to talk about astrology on this show. I'm just curious.
Aries all the way. I'm March 30th, Aries.
Oh, wow.
There's a lot of April Aries, but there's only a few March Aries. I'm a March Aries. I rep it
Very
hard.
cool. What do you think you brought with you from the rigor of your basketball training to working in film and television?
A lot, actually. I think as my career evolved and the more I got into all the facets of producing, I sometimes joke that I think I'm a really good producer because I was a point guard. I was a team captain. So I think the leadership nature of filmmaking came naturally for me because it was what I was doing for so long in my childhood. And so it wasn't unknowns to me to be able to collaborate, to have to be in a team environment where there's not, you could be one person to be the star, but it's still going to take the whole team to win games. And I was a captain. And so, I also was, I ran cross country and track and was varsity and captain on those squads as well. So basketball in particularly, you have to sharpen your own skill set, but you also have to learn how to play with others, play with your team. And that to me has carried through so much because I think a producer in a lot of ways is just that. You are a team captain, right? You are leading the ship. You are making sure that things are staying on track, but you're also making sure that no person is left behind and that this is a group effort at the end of the day around one singular vision. And every project's like another game to win. So in some weird ways go hand in hand, even though obviously one is art and one is sports. But so much, I think, of who I am was influenced from those early years, without a doubt.
I've played at playing sports. So I only sort of...
you dabbled.
Definitely. That's a perfect word. But I definitely can imagine what you're saying, and I appreciate the comparison of the team captain to producing. I want to go slightly off topic and then come back to producing, but I have a lot of Denises in my life, like very close, like family and friends and coworkers. And I was curious if you know how your parents came to your name and what it means for them and for you.
That is a great question because now I'm going to have to call my mom when this podcast ends I never knew where Denise came from, but as you can see, it's spelled differently. There's an extra E in there that I, for one, have never seen, and normally no one else has seen it either. So I have asked where that came from in terms of the intentionality to spell it differently. And the short end of it was that she felt like the Denise, the normal way that I think Denise is usually spelled, just felt like it was missing something. And she actually wanted to have something more unique for me. So she felt like that extra E, which is Iese, was just a natural placement. And I always thank her for that, because I think at least, Deniese Davis is a very broad kind of last name. But I feel like if you see my name spelled this way, most people know who I am because it's the only person they've met who spells it that way. But in terms of the meaning behind naming me, I don't know. So I'm going to have to do some homework on that.
Have you ever did you ever go by a nickname? Have you ever wanted to change your name?
No, I've always loved it, but dear God, everyone else has made up nicknames for me my entire life. So,
are you a Nisi or no?
I was going to say my family, I am Nisi to a lot of aunts and a lot of cousins. I am Nisi for sure. And it's funny, they all spell it differently, but they all call me Nisi. And I think because I played sports and, in sports, you always tend to have a backhand nickname. People would just call me D, or I hate to say it, double D, because it just is there. So, I've heard it all, but my old sweet my young rapper name used to be D Nice, because why not? That's what you got.
I love that you're old enough to have an old rapper name. I don't know if younger folks continue to do that, but
who didn't have a rapper name in middle school and high school? We all used to have a stage name that if we became famous, this is what we were going to call ourselves.
Absolutely. So to go back to producing a little bit, I was curious why producing, from thinking about your experience in high school and, editing and being in front of the camera and, shooting, I imagine. What made you choose producing as opposed to another aspect of the field?
Yeah. So, I mentioned I dabbled myself in a little bit of areas of video production. I was taught how to edit on Adobe Premiere Pro. I was directing. I was kind of producing. I was writing, all of these things in high school through various outlets that were provided to me. And so once I decided I was going to go to film school for undergrad, I had this level, because I'm from Vegas, because I didn't know anyone and I didn't feel like I had context about the industry itself. I love to read. I felt insecure to go into a program that I knew I didn't know enough about. And I just assumed, because, when you're a young Black girl going after a dream like this, that I was going to show up in a classroom full of, people who wanted to be the next Steven Spielbergs, and I'd done this their whole life and knew what Rosebud was. So I was like, well, I better read a little bit more about the industry and at least what roles exist. So that way, when I'm orienting myself in film school, I have some baseline knowledge. So that way, I can have the confidence to, even if I'm not sure, know what these roles entail, right? I don't have to waste time discovering that. So that's what I did. I read a couple books. There is one book in particular that I got this summer. I was graduating, and it was called So You Want to Be a Producer by Lawrence Terman. And one of the things that interested me about this book is that all the other roles, as I was researching, felt really easy to deduce, right? I was like, oh, a director, I see what they do. And because I had done all these facets in high school, I had some baseline experience, right? I was like, oh, I can edit full time as a career. Well, I've tried that. That's cool, but I don't want to be stuck on a computer all the time. I can, I've dabbled in writing. I was like, oh, I can have that career. Well, I've tried that. That's cool. I don't know if that's like my strongest suit. So a lot of these things became process of elimination because I had tried it. But this role of a producer that I don't think I had true context of in high school stuck out, because once I got to it, the description of what it entailed really struck me the most, because it was a little bit of everything. I loved that there was not one part of the creative process it wasn't involved in to a degree, levels of responsibility that came with it, but also not the artistic responsibility that, say, a director might have, right? Or even a DP. And so it just felt like, for someone to not have to choose one thing, a producer can be anything you want it to be. It can be a lot of things. And I think I also was drawn towards the understanding that it was one part creative and also one part business, right? I like to say today that producing is so entrepreneurial because it is, an independent production company is a mini business. So this idea that, I could pursue producing and kind of do my own thing and not have to go work for someone else, whereas these other jobs are more for hire jobs. Director still has to be hired, a writer still has to go be hired, an editor still has to be hired. I was like, a producer creates their work. So that struck me. And so that's kind of where I followed my heart. I got this book, finished it that summer, showed up in undergrad day one. And I remember introducing myself my freshman year to people as someone who wanted to be a producer. Like I just knew that early. And mostly because of all of these reasons. And to be honest, years later, I have no regrets. It's always in some ways, weird ways, sometimes what I think I was meant to do. But I think I embraced it early on because I was curious enough, but interested enough, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, I have produced and always feel like producers are born and not necessarily that it can be taught. And I'm really curious, since you actually studied it in undergrad and grad school, how do you feel about that?
I agree to an extent. And the reason why is because there are skill sets of a producer that you can learn without a doubt, right? And I think that's just the hands-on, let's say, craftsmanship of it, right? Can you learn how to read a budget? Can you learn how production works, the language there, like those type of things, right? That's all to me stuff that you can inherit educationally. However, there are parts about being a producer that in some way comes down to the person itself that I might not be able to teach you personality-wise, right? I might not be able to teach you how to talk to people, a large group of people, various set of personalities, all working towards the same goal, but may not be someone that you get along with, right? And how do you navigate that? That's something that is, I think, a personal journey that some people just have and some people might never have, right? So there's certain, I'd say, let's call it personality skill sets of a producer that, in some ways you can probably learn to develop, but that's kind of the essence of if you have it, you have it. And if you don't, it's a little bit harder to gain because, it's a lot about who you are as a person. Can you let your ego down? Can you work with others? Can you steer the ship? Can you problem solve on the drop of a dime? Because, if you're one of those people who is afraid to speak up or who's afraid to think outside the box and find the solutions no matter the cost, then you're probably not a good producer. And not everyone can navigate their lives in that way. I think there's a lot of people who tend to defer to others, tend to walk in the background, tend to not speak up for themselves. And in my opinion, it's like, well, you can't be any of those things to be a good producer. So again, it's half and half. You can be taught a lot of the skill sets, and then there's certain things that just come naturally to the individual.
You got your start in low budget indie film production. Some of us still live in that world. And I was wondering if you could share a funny story from your music video producing days. Anything come to mind, or, an insane request or kind of mishap?
Oh, gosh. Well, I do have a funny story, but it was from a short film I did, not necessarily a music video. And I still joke about it to this day because I met the DP who ended up coming in Insecure, Ava Burkowski, on this short. So we tend to always talk about these early days. But, we did this really wonderful short that was through an AFI program, the Directing Workshop for Women, this one summer. And, those shorts usually don't for like $30,000. It was a 5-day shoot. But this particular short was challenging because it was one location, but it was all exterior nights. So you had already 5 overnight shoots. You have a really amazing cast. When this is all done, I might tell you what the project was because it actually is a notable project, actually, that became a TV show. But we were doing the short and we rented, we were portraying a bachelor, like the reality show like scene. So we had, all these glitz and glamours of these like contestants, and it was like the making of the show. And we rented this mansion in Glendale for the 5 days. And I somehow brokered this deal because, those type of locations are not cheap. Somehow I got it cheaply. And I'll never forget the guy, the owner, basically built this house himself. He was like a construction architect, designer person. And this beautiful house in the mountains of Glendale was his baby. And he, for some reason, let us shoot there. I don't know how I found him, but we got there. And I had my little army of PAs. But, when you're doing low budget, you don't have a 20-person production staff. It was me, my production manager, and my PAs, and that was about it. And in my low budget days, the only way you can do things cheaply is to wear a lot of hats. And so again, I found a location, I pulled the permit, like I was on my location team. And the short story is day one in the evening, I get pulled because they say, hey, the owner is really pissed because the budget truck, you're renting budget trucks for your equipment. The truck parked in the driveway is leaking oil all over its driveway. And I was like, what do you mean? And I went over and he was furious because sure enough, our little, cheap trucks with our equipment and stuff had leaked oil. And because it sat there, was leaking oil all over his beautiful stone hand-crafted driveway. And, I calmed him down and he basically said, because also we're still there like 3 more nights. So like, I can't, what are we going to do if he shuts us down? So we made an agreement, which was by the time we wrapped, that oil had to be gone. Otherwise, he was going to stick us with a crazy L&D bill. I rallied up my PAs. I sent them to Home Depot. I said, you go get every stain remover that you can think of, and every brush and toothbrush and whatever else we need, rags you can think of. And they came back and I spent, the next 2 evenings on my hands and knees with my PAs, scrubbing oil out of this driveway, making it crystal clean. And I'll never forget, even, I think Ava, my DP, or the director, someone came over at one point, because we're shooting, by the way, like I'm doing this during production hours. And someone came over and was like, Denise, why are you doing that? Like, just let your PAs handle it. And I was like, no, I'm doing it with my PAs, unless you don't want to have your short finished, because I just feel like if I'm in here with them, I know we'll get it done. And you can go back and get your short concentrated and don't worry about what I'm doing over in this driveway. You go make your short, girl, before they pull the plug. It's one of my favorite memories because we got the oil out and he still tried to stick us with the bill, but he ended up dropping that. So anyways, fun times because, indie days, you got to do what you got to do,
Yeah, it's always something. Well, I want to talk about Insecure, not forever, because I'm sure you've talked about it a lot, but, it's such an impactful show, right, to a generation of makers, a generation of folks. And I teach and I have a lot of staff that are a different generation than me. And, 9 out of 10, particularly if they're Black film folks, they mentioned it as a show that inspired them to want to become a filmmaker or an artist, in some way, or something that was in the background of their life, that propelled them forward. And that must be incredible to be a part of making something that important. And I'm just curious, how does it feel to have had a hand in shifting culture?
I'm gonna be honest, sometimes it's still surreal because it had been such a wild ride and journey for all of us, including myself. The show undoubtedly helped launch my own career, or at least leveled up my career, right? It's not like I wasn't producing prior, but it allowed me to jump through a couple hoops to be able to be in a playing field for, television and film in a way that when you're in the indie space, you don't always get those opportunities. So it's surreal because, when I think back about the whole time that we were making the show, I think the beauty of it is we didn't make it for any of that, right? We didn't make it for anyone's validation other than what we thought we wanted to do and create the show we wanted to see and be authentic as possible. And even if that meant fighting against the traditional norms of producing content, especially at that level, so be it. And I think that's what was so special about that time. And I think the cherry on top is seeing the cultural impact, seeing that, when it's all said and done, the same passion and feeling that we had for what we were doing resonated, I think is so fulfilling, right? Because the best part I think about making art sometimes is, you hope that there's an audience for it, but sometimes you make it for yourself. And I feel like we all made that for ourselves to know that at the end of the day, even if no one ever watched it, this is something we're proud of on an individual level. So it really is just sweetening the pot to know that it's had the impact it's had, it's resonated the way it has. And it comes up even when I hear pitches. People will be like, "It's like Insecure meets this," and it makes you chuckle because you're just like, "Who knew that this little show would become this juggernaut of sorts?" And it's just a special time. So yeah, that's probably my first gut reaction to that, is that we didn't know. We hoped, but we had no idea what it was going to become, other than a show that we would have watched.
Yeah. Well, thank you for listening to your gut and pursuing that. One of the things that I've liked about the show, I sometimes felt too old to be watching it, but I really appreciated the look of it. It's just so tonally like gorgeous. And it was amazing, of course, to have, these two dark-skinned women being the center of it and to see South LA portrayed in this way. And I was wondering, as a producer, are you involved in creative, or are you more, do you stay on sort of like production management and business, or are you kind of, there's all kinds of producers, but do you find yourself involved in all aspects?
My role, at least as far as television goes, right, is a little bit of an anomaly. It doesn't always exist. And I'm what's considered a non-writing producer in television, right? And I think it's because, as we know, television exists as a writer's medium where they are the creator, the showrunners, they're in charge, right? So when you're coming into a TV project, creatively speaking, I give input where is needed, but I also help. I always make sure I defer to the creatives who are the ones in the writer's room putting the show together and who are at the EP level, right? The Issas, the princesses. And my job is I consider myself like a conduit. So I am a little bit of everywhere. I am in production. I'm in the creative meetings. I'm in the in-between conversations, whether it's with departments or at the high level, and really trying to find a way to connect all the dots and make sure that, there's no holes being overlooked. And part of that is because everyone involved has their own respective responsibilities, right? As the showrunner, as the star, as a writer, as a director, as a DP, you name it. They all have I have a day-to-day job while also having to look at these things. Well, my job was to look at everything for everyone, which is such a joy because I wasn't involved at every part of the conversation. And it was as small as, we can be in a marketing meeting and someone mentions, or someone mentions we want a Black photographer this, and I can chime in and help give suggestions for that, right? So it's just like finding ways to be useful while also making sure that I'm not stepping on the toes of the people whose vision this is at the end of the day. I'm helping to execute that vision.
And just really quickly, for anyone listening who doesn't already know sort of your origins of meeting Issa, could you talk a little bit about coming to work on the web version of Misadventures of an Awkward Black Girl, and then, going with Issa to HBO? If you could just share a little bit about that.
Yeah. I met Issa 2 weeks before I graduated from AFI, where I went to grad school for producing. So much of my origin story into my career started with her because she was doing the second season of her web series. She needed to find a producer. She had actually already started production. She was a couple episodes in when we met. And then she hired me, and I swear to God, we met on a Saturday. She told me she wanted to hire me on a Sunday, and then was like, "We're shooting the next episode on Saturday." So when I say I just jumped in, it was just like sink or swim. We'll figure this out. And we collaborated ever since. And, what was so great about those days was that, we had some money, but so much of it was just the creative, how do we just make this for what we got kind of days, which is always such a joy because it's so much about the creative at large. And I was working with her on the web series while simultaneously building my career as a freelance producer and everything else, right? That's when I did the other shorts and the music videos, all of the things. And I continued to do both working with her on one-off stuff and other things once Awkward Black Girl ended, and also continuing to take other work until about 3 years later, when she got Insecure greenlit and it was picked up to a pilot. And, we had talks about whether or not I could join because, television has its own way of doing things. But she called me up one day and finally said, "Hey, so I spoke to my team and I spoke to the network, and I told them I really want you on this, and to expect a call from the line producer, whoever else, to figure it out. And so, again, I credit her so much for opening that door, because she didn't have to. She could have easily said, "Hey, girl, I'm gonna go do this HBO show. Hopefully we can work again one day." And she didn't do that. She figured out a way to open that door enough. And I still had to prove myself. I still had to go in and show people what it was that I could do. But, she made sure that I was able to join her, which I always joke was our postgraduate school, because, doing Insecure as a pilot was like, we were like, we kind of know what we're doing, but we never produced we never done anything at this level. So, we just went with the flow, and I don't know, it was just such a great time, I would say, because when we started discovering what you were supposed to do about television, we were like, oh, can we break the rules? We always were trying to break the rules.
Scene is a journal of film and visual culture focused on Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities globally. Subscribe today and receive 2 beautifully designed issues a year, featuring essays, reviews, interviews, and more from critics, artists, and other luminaries of color. Learn more at scene.blackstarfest.org.
You're listening to Mini Lumens. And now, back to my conversation with Deniese Davis.
So with Issa, of course, we had 6 beautiful seasons of Insecure. And you also founded, you launched initially Issa Rae Productions, but then Hooray with her, and then Color Creative, the management company that's dedicated to supporting diverse creators and producing inclusive content. Last year, you launched your own company, Reform Media Group. And I was curious for you, with all of these ventures, what's driving you? Because you could just focus on making money, right? This is a commercial industry, but it feels to me that you've been mission-led. And I was just wondering, what is driving you to make work?
Yeah, well, I think what's important is, I definitely stepped away from like the Hooray, Issa Rae Productions of it all. And that's really, Issa's thing. Whereas with Color Creative, once it morphed into the management company, and we were able to hire the wonderful Talitha Watkins to kind of become the president and run it for us. I also took a step back there because that's my baby too. But I was very honest with myself once we were evolving into representation that I didn't want to run a management company. That's not probably where my heart lies in terms of being a manager. So, we found the right person to do that. And once those things were off the hook, Reform for me was so much about what I keep considering a new chapter in my producing career, because, I think of 2020 and the pandemic, and like so many people, when everything just stopped and slowed down, I had a lot of time to kind of reflect on my career to date, because it just felt like, God, I've been going and going for so many years, and I had all these like different various levels of success that I'm proud of. But for the first time, I'm taking it all in and then thinking about, well, what is next? What is the future? What does that look like? And, one thing that really became very apparent or very clear to me was that there was more I wanted to do. And I might be at a point in my life where I could stay and continue to build side by side with Issa, which would be wonderful. And who's to complain about that? Or maybe there's a moment before it's too late to discover who Deniese is as a producer on her own. Because I think so much of my career up until, recent was producing for everybody else, being that go-to person that would just step in and be able to execute. And that's great. And I'm very happy to have done that. But, I do have a creative side. I do love to develop. I love to discover projects and, have a different brand that I would probably consider outside of Issa's brand, right? And the only way to be able to build that and entertain it was to say, well, what is that? So, Reform, as I put together the pieces, is an amalgamation of Deniese figuring out that part of myself. I'm going to build my own producing brand on my own. That's not, tethered to any one talent or anyone else. And I have to now find this discovery of voice of sorts that I don't think I've ever gotten a chance to really do, and figure out what are the projects and the stories that I'm personally just passionate about that I can help bring to life, and do it from there. So it's been an exciting first year. It's been was very scary at first because like, who does that? Who restarts their career when you're like, how can you get any higher than this? But, I have an amazing support and friendship with Issa, who was very much behind this and was like, do what you got to do. And obviously we're continuing to run Color Creative together and and a bunch of projects together. But yeah, this was something I woke up and basically said, if I don't do this now, when? And I also don't want to be 50 years old and wake up and wonder what it would ever been for me to build this for myself too. So, Reform is mission driven. So much of it is splintered off from so much of the work I've done prior to that. But I think the key part and the difference of it is just that it's me figuring out my own identity through producing.
And do you have a sense of what that identity is? I mean, is it informed by your own identities, like as a Black queer woman? Like, are the stories skewing in those directions, or is it like all over the place? You've also done a lot of comedy. So are you now going to sort of like bust out with like a historical drama or,
Yeah, all the right questions. I mean, look, you've never lied. That is exactly what's happening. I started this company and said, okay, what are the projects? What are the stories? Where am I going to start? And the one thing that stuck out was like, what's hard is I love everything. I love all good storytelling, whatever way and shape it comes to me. Like, it's just on a personal level. Does this excite me? Is this something I would want to see? And I think the nugget of that is, I'm biracial, queer, Black woman from Vegas, of all places. So when you put all that in a box, that opens up every single door imaginable because, I'm drawn towards different things. I lived in New York for many years. And so, it is very multicultural, I would say. It's not focusing on only Black stories. Because I also think that's sometimes too niche to a degree where I'm like, no, I would love to do, this thriller Puerto Rican female-led story or, whatever it's called to me. I think the bottom line is that are they stories that I feel like are underrepresented across the board, whatever way that looks like. And then, I think from a genre perspective, what I'm most excited about is opening up. I actually don't, because I've kind of come from comedy for so long, that's not the only lane I want to stay in. So I've opened it up and said, I'm going to be doing dramas, like some prestige dramas. I want to do some YA content, some family-led content, which I think is hugely underserved in the marketplace, especially for people of color. Want to do some thriller murder mysteries because I love that shit and who doesn't? But I don't think I see enough Black and brown folks as the protagonists in those stories. We're always the victims. So we're always the lawyer or whoever else, the side characters. And, I want to do some genre fantasy things that I would love to do, whether that's like witches or vampires and just out of the ordinary. And then actually I'm also leaning into the doc space. It's something on a personal level I'm obsessed with. I watch a lot. And I think even in that space in particular, I don't think there's enough producers of color who have the ability to just push projects through. And obviously there's a huge moment right now where our stories are being told, but not always with our help. And personally, I'm also like, okay, the doc space is so rich, but like, they don't always have to be so traumatic, guys. Like there's so many historical figures and moments and things that we could shine a light on that I realize it's only going to take us producing that space to help showcase that, right? So that's the gamut. It's broad, but I also feel like I built it to be specific enough. So as I'm building my slate, it's very easy for me to kind of navigate it without just saying, send me everything, I'll read it all. I'm like, well, actually, let's back that up. Let's be targeted with what I build on this slate.
Yeah. Well, just as a process, how do you decide which projects you're going to get behind? Is it a feeling or do you have a particular, ritual or practice that you engage with to make a decision?
It is feeling based. It is. Sometimes it's hard, but I will say what I've realized recently, because I had to control myself not long ago where I was like, Denise, you have to learn how to say no. You're saying yes to too many things. Like I'm loving it all. And, but I also had to kind of regroup the things I read and ask myself why I loved them. And a lot of it is the way it made me feel. But the ones that stood out the most are the ones that I couldn't shake, if that makes sense, right? So you read it, you resonate with it, you think it's a great piece of work, you're interested in it, but I'll go to sleep at night and wake up and I'm still thinking about that story. Or I'm still thinking about it. And it could be a comedy even, right? But there's certain projects that I've taken on that I'm so moved by, whether emotionally, whether it's the way it's made me think or the way I think it, it can resonate with others, that stays with me enough where I'm just like, oh, there's no way. I know that too much on my plate, but how can I say no to this? How can I say no to being a part of something that I think can start a conversation in whatever way that is? So that's probably the tiebreaker to a degree. I try not to make decisions based off of talent or the package, or, if such and such wants to do this, it's tantalizing. It's really easy to just want to take the ticket and ride with something. But sometimes, I think what I'm most careful about with building a new company, building a brand from scratch, is that, everything I do in these next few years are going to count towards that. So I kind of have to be a little bit more protected. I kind of have to be a little bit more snobbish, as you will, just in terms of what truly excites me, because these are the projects I need to stand behind that, if nothing else, will showcase who I am as a producer and what type of brand I'm building. So for all of those reasons, yeah, it has to it has to resonate with me. And the last thing I'll say is, because as a producer, once you say yes to a project, these things can take 2, 3, 5, 7 years before they become a reality. So I obviously think about the longevity of it. And in order for me to put that much time and energy into something for that amount of, for that length of time, I have to love it. I have to be passionate. I have to be looking forward to every conversation I'm going to have about it, because it's going to be around and on my plate for, much longer than I might have liked, but I don't want to lose interest in something. So that's, to me, is huge.
Well, this is a nice segue. I was curious how you balance all of your different projects, but really this is coming from someone asked me the other day if I had any hobbies, and I couldn't think of any besides shopping, which feels functional also. But I was curious for you, do you have any hobbies? Do you have, a practice of self-care? Where are you finding balance?
This has been a work in progress for me. I think a few years ago, I became very adamant about making sure I carve out time in my life and my work life for just personal time, right? So I'll get to hobbies in a second, because I might have some, maybe, but just in general, I think when you grow up in the independent world, and I'm sure you can agree with this too, you tend to work around the clock, right? There's no work hours. There's no 9 to 5 when you're independent, hustling for that check, because those projects you take on, they take so much of you. And in some ways they're able to. It's like how they take advantage of you because you're a freelance independent contractor. So there's no clock in, clock out. And I often think about so much of my 20s and all of those early days. I was working on the weekends, was sending emails at night. There was no cutoff time. And so, a lot of those habits evolved with me to a degree. And a few years ago, I was kind of feeling burnt out, and I realized, like, oh God, I'm carrying my work into all hours of the day. And that's not okay, because if I'm not carving out time just for myself, for my personal life, I'll probably start to lose my own identity and not know, how to separate the two. And that's, it's not what I wanted for myself, especially still being so young. So basically I have a rule of thumb, which is if I get an email, after hours during the week or during the weekend, I tend to look at the context and ask myself, if I respond, is there a difference between responding right away, right this moment, in the middle of whatever I'm doing? That's not work. Or could I wait until, first thing in the morning or Monday morning, if it's the weekend? And will there be any negative impact? And usually there's not. And so, that's how I discern whether or not I open myself up to the work side of me during my personal time. And I think over the last few years in doing that, I discovered, chances are, I'm very discretionary. Obviously, if it's something that I know is super important and urgent, I'm on it immediately. But everything else, I'm always like, it could wait, because I deserve to have a life. So I've never seen it come back to me in a bad way. So I can kind of continue to do that. And that's the way I found to separate the two, which I very much enjoy.
Well, I have a quick question before you answer about hobbies. I think I read that your partner is also a producer. So is that true?
She is. But you know what's fun? She's an a producer and unscripted. So it's such a wonderful balance because sometimes I'll hear her and her jobs and I'm always like, I don't get it. I don't understand how you do what she do. And then she's always like, well, I feel the same way about you because it's like we have the same role, but our fields of interest are so different. So I find it fascinating, but it's also great because creatively, you know, we can watch movies and talk about them, or, you know, she'll read a script and I'll talk to her about what she thinks. And, you know, she's able to understand my job and what it requires of me as an insider, but also not someone who is too close to it.
Mm-hmm. I was wondering if there was any like bad behavior in terms of like working those late hours. You know what I mean about working those late hours or on the weekends, or do you all keep each other balanced?
Funny? She's much worse than me. She's been trying to find her boundaries. Meanwhile, I'm the one who gets upset. I'll sit there on the couch waiting to watch a movie, and I'm like, for real, you just gonna get on that call? Like, it's 9 o'clock. Tell them it's 9 o'clock. You don't need to be on a conference call. It's 9 o'clock. But no, it's funny. She's always very impressed with how clear I'm able to just cut it out. But look, I think it's just maybe because I started so young in a lot of ways, I feel like I've always just worked, right? And so there was just a moment where I know I have such a long journey still ahead of me, but I don't want to wake up in 30 years and be like, God, I never had a life. Like, that's no fun. Like, what do we do all of this for if we can enjoy it?
That's real. So, and speaking of enjoyment, what are the hobbies? What hobbies do you have?
Oh, girl, I was like, I can't think of any. I'm with you. I was like, well, what would you constitute as a hobby? I mean, I like to walk my dog. Honestly, I love watching docs. That is like my brainless, you know, some people watch reality shows and they like can watch a sitcom and that's what they like turn on late at night or do. Like, I will watch a docuseries or a documentary and geek out. And my fiance thinks it's so cute because I'll be like, did you know? And this is this, because I'll learn so much. Like, I'll wake up the next morning wanting to talk all about the Kennedys because I just finished the Kennedy miniseries on CNN. And I'm like, yo, we got to talk about this. So it's a weird hobby, but I enjoy it. And I do love reading, especially when it's not for work. I was an avid reader so much of my whole life. So I love to get lost in a good book and a good story, but I feel like lately it's been harder to bring that into my life because I do so much of it for work too. So, you know, the last thing I want to do is read another book, even if it's for personal fulfillment.
Yeah. Well, I want to pivot a little bit to talk about, you know, what you have coming up. And of course, there's Rap Shit, which is the new comedy you're producing with Issa for HBO Max. And was wondering if you could talk just a little bit about where the idea for this series came from.
It's all Issa's brainchild. You know, this is her next show that she created after Insecure. And Sri Singleton is our showrunner, who was a writer who came up with us on Insecure as well. And it's just fun. It's going to be very different than I think people would expect, at least if you know about Insecure. But it's also one and the same in terms of, you know, keeping the authenticity of this world of the characters and leaning into, I think, real life, which, you know, is sometimes still missing in our television landscape. So, I think this is Issa in a lot of ways kind of telling a version of us always wanted to tell within the music industry side of things. So I'm just excited for that to, you know, finally come out hopefully this year, and we'll see how it does. But it's unlike anything I've ever even been involved in. So that's what I think is I'm really anticipating in terms of seeing people's response and how they receive it.
Can you tell us what will be different, or do we have to wait?
You might have to wait. I mean, I think you'll see a little bit of it, you know, whenever a trailer drops. But it's just, you know, there's so many unique things about the show that are just challenging, you know, whether it's creative, whether it's the execution of it. But then there's also, you know, a lot of similar things from like what we pulled from Insecure, right? Like there's a lot of fresh faces that you've never seen before on screen. You know, we're showing Miami in such a way that I don't think you've ever seen on screen. So, you know, but also very similar to what we did with Inglewood and South LA. So it's like there's similarities in that, but also it's its own original unique spin on that story. So yeah. And then, you know, on the other side, with as far as I'm concerned and Reform is concerned, since I've been back from Rap Shit, which ended at the end of last year, I've really just prioritized and focused my slate. You know, I've been very busy setting up a handful of projects in the television space and the feature space, and just kind of lining up things in development while also keeping an eye towards hopefully making a film this year. Like that is the goal, is to go produce a feature and just have a mini break from television, because it's kind of all I've been doing for the last 6 years. So I was like, this would be nice. Let's just switch it up a bit. So that's the hope. That's the plan, is and what's on the horizon for me.
I read that Chicago is one of your favorite musicals, which it is for me too. And I was wondering if musicals are in, is that part of the future reform or Deniese Davis slate generally?
Oh my God, I'm obsessed. Absolutely. There is a musical that Issa and I developed together that we're still producing, that's at Universal. It's called Love in America. Amy Aniobi and this writing duo, the Dirty Nomads, are co-writing. But it's been in studio development languish for quite a few years now. So still actively working on that. And that's a full-on original concept that I kind of helped stir up. But 1000% as far as reform goes and this new chapter, it has actually been high on the list. But I'll tell you what, not everyone loves musicals. It's always hard to go and it's hard to find just a spec script laying around that happens to be a musical.
Yeah.
So I've been very aware that it may be something I have to help creatively conceit with the writer, or find a piece of IP or something. But I'm obsessed, and Chicago for so many reasons. The funny part is I was only familiar with that through the movie. I think I thought the movie came first, and then realized it was based on a play, and was like, what? And then I saw the play in college and was like, oh no, have they seen the movie? It's so much better. So it's one of those high bars in my life because of all of the things I loved about that film in terms of, what it can be. One of my all-time favorite movies too is Singing in the Rain, which I don't think as many people have seen it, but I think it's a movie I saw in sixth grade. That was the first time I saw anything about making movies and thought it was fascinating. So yeah, it is, the lifetime achievement goal for myself is to bring a musical to life.
Yeah. Before you mentioned Singing in the Rain, I was thinking about, for me, it's always the kind of ones that are the behind the scenes. So there was that show on NBC a couple of years ago. I think it was called Smash. And I was thinking about the Fosse miniseries that came out right in 2020. But it's I feel like it gives you that rest, because I think musicals that are all song are definitely obnoxious. But the thing about Chicago and other ones that give you a little bit of space before you go to the next song, I think those are great for me.
No, completely. I mean, look, I will be honest. One of my goals is actually to make a musical that doesn't feel like a Broadway musical. And that's because there's something about where hip hop and R&B and music has gone today in terms of pop culture and everything about it, and its ability to cross over in such a huge way, that I'm always so surprised that, when people want to do musicals, it tends to be Tick, Tick, Boom or Hamilton or things that feel Broadway-esque, even Chicago to a degree, where I sit there and ponder okay, well, why can't we find, this is my bad pitch, but I've brought it up before, but, why can't we find that Drake-esque led musical, almost do you remember a hip opera with Beyonce?
I was just about to say that, but make a joke of it.
But the only example that I can ever point to, but it's just because that was also kind of spoken word-ish, but I'm just no, I mean a music of today, using popular music, not necessarily popular songs, but the way it feels and the way it moves and the people we see in it. Why can't we find an authentic, grounded musical that is like that, right? Because figure out, if you could figure out how to do a Travis Scott-esque musical, people would show up. Are you kidding me? People would be it's lit in the movie theater. But for whatever reason, I see that vision, and I was but again, as a producer, I was let me go crack a story first and then figure that part out. Because, you have to do it right to really land it. And that to me is what excites me about the musical space is I'm how do I do something different that it doesn't feel like you wouldn't have thought about this as a musical, but it is, right? And the same reason why Hamilton was huge. But, to me, in a lot of ways, Hamilton's still Broadway-esque in the way it's written and performed. So I just want to find let me go find my Drake-led musical project.
I mean, I think Drake would actually be the one. He's such a good actor. Him on SNL. I love him on SNL almost more than his music career.
I know. Well, that's the best part. I could just be Drake, but you don't got to be in it. Just write the song. Just help me come up with the music that people would really vibe with, and I'll figure out the best story for it and find the best writer for it. But just something that's authentic and that feels very much geared towards maybe our generation in a big way. Because I think people tend to think that, there's not like musicals tend to lean for an older audience. They're like, younger kids don't want to see musicals. And you go, but that's because you guys don't make them for them. So what are you talking about?
Right. Like what the Wiz must have been for the 70s,
Completely.
Yeah.
Or Sparkle or, any of those things. They all had their heydays. And yeah, just, you look at TikTok and you're like, what do you mean people don't want to see a musical? Like if I see They Don't Care About Bruno clips one more time, like people love things that, that they could then emulate on social media too, to that degree. So I don't know. It's my pie in the sky wish list.
Yeah. Well, can you share some of your creative or even kind of like spiritual North Stars or mentors in your head? They don't have to be in real life.
I'll talk about a book that changed my life that I tend to refer to all the time. But I had a mentor who, when I was in college and she was in the advertising agency, told me about The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. It's such a simple book, but I just remember being at an age where I was questioning how or why so many things were happening. So many good things, by the way, were happening and how random they always were, right? Just in terms of how I ended up in New York and grad school, even meeting Issa. Sometimes, you look back at your journey, you're just like, I don't know. I just kept like going after the goal or the dream and things just kept falling into place. And this book changed my life because it kind of figured out meaning, just in terms of following your heart and knowing that in a lot of ways the universe, I think, aligns itself to those who stay true to themselves. And I think that's something that really stuck to me, especially I think in this town, where it's so easy to become someone you're not because of whatever else comes your way, whether it's opportunities, whether it's riches, whether it's notoriety, fame, you name it. And, I think what's been important to me is to always stay grounded. And so there's a lot of people I look to in this industry that are themselves, it includes people like Melina Matsoukas, who I consider like a big sister after working with her for many years, or even someone like Issa, right? But I think the reason why there's people in my life that I truly go to for advice is because they're human. I feel like they're just like me, right? We're just people at the end of the day. And that means a lot because I think, again, so much of this industry cannot be that. And it's hard to navigate because of all these other things. But yeah, there just people who are just themselves that I think I respect and work with a lot more in that degree.
Well, I have one last question for you. And I was just curious, you're so young. I think you might be the youngest guest we have this season.
What?
And
that's fascinating. Just how young do you think I am? No, I'm kidding.
Well, I kind of calculated from an article, so I think you're like 34, 35.
Oh, am I? What's the year? 22? Oh, yeah. I just turned 34. Thank you. Well, I just had a birthday, so I was like, am I 35? No, I'm not there yet. I'm 34.
Okay. Happy belated birthday.
Thank you.
Which is, you're 10 years younger than me. So, I'm saying young. I'm not saying it like you're a child, but it's significantly young to have accomplished so much. And I'm just curious if you have any interest in other career paths, once you produce your musical and you produce some feature films and you know what I mean? Like in 10 more years, do you think you'll want to do this forever? Or do you imagine you want to try your hand at, I don't know what else. Are there other things that you're interested in?
Man, you are just speaking my life. So, I think so much of the last couple of years of me going through this moment of coming out of my own shell and launching Reform and doing all of that, that question actually came up to myself just in terms of thinking about longevity and thinking about, it's almost like I go back to my basketball days where there's a part of me now, I've gotten to a point where I know I'm not near the top. I know I'm not exactly where I want to be just yet, but I know it's going to come at some point, right? And I do think and believe that there's going to be a point in time where I know I'm going to want to do less and less, at least in terms of the nature of what I do. And that's just because of how much it takes a toll on you. And, I also tend to joke, but very seriously say, I also don't want to be that 6-year-old executive or producer who's still trying to be relevant and still trying to tell the people half my age what the audience wants to watch. I kind of just want to enjoy being old and hopefully having grandkids and not trying to hold on to power, right? Because again, if you work your whole life, when do you get to enjoy it? So what I've decided on is, there will come a point where I do step away from this active producing. I'm sure I'll be involved to a degree, but this level of it. And, shift gears to probably one of two things or both, which is, I want to teach one day. I get asked a lot even to this day, but I feel like I still have more to learn. I'm too young. I don't have the time to commit, but I do want to teach one day. It's the reason why I also was excited to go to grad school and get a master's degree. So I definitely see that in my purview at some point. Maybe that'll be my retirement plan. And then the other side is, something that I forgot about myself from my childhood days, but, I used to love to write and not be a screenwriter. Dear God, to this day, I promise you, I don't want to be a screenwriter. But I used to write my own made up stories, my own books as a kid. I would write chapters of characters and all these things. And I found a journal from the 5th grade when it asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And what struck me was that it didn't say a basketball player, didn't say like anything that I would have thought it might have said. It said I wanted to be a writer. I was like, whoa, I forgot about this. I forgot about this side of me that, yes, has always been creative, but you know what? In some ways, that's right. Like, sure, you can hear it now, how much I love to sit here and brainstorm coming up with stories and what to see on the screen, but then obviously then work in tandem with the writer to bring that to life and execute. But from a novelist standpoint, I was like, why not? Why can't I go and be like a young Terry McMillan and just go write some like Black family love novels or, have a whole second career and telling other types of stories that I can just sit down and write on a beach one day. So that's probably one idea. Whether I'll get there, who knows? But I think it's something that I've come around to saying, all right, when I retire from producing, I'm going to go teach and I'm going to go live on a beach and write novels. I think that sounds amazing.
I love that for you.
Yeah. Why not? Because it also, I think, as much as I'm not producing, part of me is like, oh, that's where I'll be the most fulfilled creatively. I can still continue to be creative, just in a different way, and maybe in a challenging way. And obviously, if you can't tell, I tend to like putting myself in challenging positions. So yeah, maybe that's what's next. But girl, I don't know. We got like 30 more years, so we'll see. That could change. That could change.
Word. Well, thank you so much. This has been so illuminating and instructive even to me. And I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. Look, I appreciate you doing your homework, your research, and asking such wonderful questions. This has been really fun. It sounds like an old catch up with old friends. So thank you.
Even if the stars don't shine these days, even if the stars don't shine these days, I know we can find a way.
To follow Denise's work, check out her production company at reformmediagroup.com. You can follow Denise on Instagram at Miss Denise. This season of Mini Lumens is brought to you by Open Society Foundations. It is produced by BlackStar Projects in partnership with Rowhome Productions. The host and executive producer of Mini Lumens is me, Maori Karmael Holmes. This episode was produced by Imani Leonard and Dallas Taylor. Associate producers are Irit Reinheimer and Farah Rahaman. Managing producer is Alex Lewis. Executive editor is John Myers. Our music supervisor is David Little Dave Adams, BlackStar's Music and Cinema Fellow supported by the Pop Culture Collaborative. Our theme song was composed by Vijay Mohan and remixed by Little Dave. This episode features music by April Fool Child and Trigo Fair. Sending you light and see you next time.